But the whole world has been turned away from real money and has been fooled into using currency, a deceitful impostor that is silently stealing your two most valuable assets, your time and your freedom. Welcome to the rabbit hole.
The further you look into the past, the further that you can see into the future. This program is all about creating your own crystal ball, being able to gaze into the future, being able to change this crisis, the greatest crisis in the history of mankind, into your great opportunity.
The hidden secrets of money, some of them are hidden in plain sight. They're like right in front of you. The way the monetary system works is something that isn't actually hidden away from all of us. It's out in the open, but it's complex and people just they can't see how it works. It's hard for them to imagine that we're living in such a hoax. Others are meant to be secret, but the truth is slowly coming out, like the Federal Reserve being a private corporation and not really part of the U.S. government. But when I started studying this, what I found was that there was no place that I could point people to where they could get it all in one spot. And so I basically decided to write my book about it and consolidate monetary history, economics, the markets, fundamentals of gold and silver. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors in economics, and I've sort of made it my job to lift the fog for people.
Welcome to Egypt. This is where it all began. Roughly 5,000 years ago, the Egyptians started using gold and silver as their predominant form of currency. But it was not yet money. The pieces of gold and silver that they were using were odd sizes and weights, odd purities, so it still was not interchangeable, where each unit is the same as the next. This meant that nothing really had a price yet. You couldn't put a price of so many coins on something because they didn't have coins yet. Trade was still difficult. It was still a guessing game when it came to the exchange of values. One of the reasons that we are in the financial mess that we are today globally is that people do not understand the difference between currency and money. Currency is a medium of exchange, a unit of account. It is portable, durable, divisible, and something called fungible. Fungible means that each unit is the same as the next unit. $1 in my pocket buys the same amount as $1 in your pocket. Money is all of those things plus a store of value over a long period of time. Even financial planners, bankers, your accountant, they don't understand the difference between currency and money. The currency in your pocket is a medium of exchange. It's a unit of account because it's got numbers on it. It's somewhat durable, it's portable, it's divisible in that you can make change, and it's fungible. $1 in my pocket buys the same amount as $1 in your pocket. But because governments can print more and more and more of it and dilute the currency supply, it's continually transferring wealth out of your pocket, out of your bank account, to the government and to the banking system. The reason that gold and silver are the optimum form of money is because of their properties. It's an easy medium of exchange because gold and silver store a large amount of value in a very small area. It's a unit of account. Pure gold has the same value all over the planet. So an ounce of gold buys the same amount here in Egypt as it would in China or in the United States. It's durable. The same gold that Egyptians were using in trade 5,000 years ago is still here with us today. It does not corrode. It's divisible. You can make change with it. It's very portable. You could use something like oil as money. It's just that you can't carry around a barrel of oil on your back. It's fungible. Pure gold is the same wherever it is on Earth. Pure silver is the same wherever it is on Earth. It's limited in quantity. That's the reason that it maintains its purchasing power. Governments cannot print it. Over the last 5,000 years, only gold and silver have maintained their purchasing power. There have been thousands upon thousands of fiat currencies that are unbacked by gold or silver, and they have all gone to zero. It's a 100% failure rate.
Well, fiat currency, of course, is a currency that exists at the dictate or by fiat from a government. You see, they have their printing presses, and the paper money rolls off the printing presses. And then they give it the fiat designation, which makes the currency official. It's just worthless paper. But when Ben Bernanke gives it the special sign, and they have the cult meeting at the Federal Open Market Committee meetings, it suddenly becomes currency.
If you look at what's really going on, it's a con game. And so there's confidence. Well, the Federal Reserve is very forthright about what they're doing. If you read their websites, they'll tell you it's a confidence game. They tell you that there's no intrinsic value in their money. They'll tell you that they print it backed by absolutely nothing. They actually display all these facts. But if you tell somebody in the public that this stuff is created out of thin air, there's no backing whatsoever, it's absolutely worthless, it's about as valuable as monopoly money, they'll look at you like you're nuts.
Is there an example throughout history of a fiat currency, a piece of paper that's unbacked by anything, surviving?
Short answer, no. Long answer, no. And here's why.
They say that money doesn't grow on trees, but the truth is that the modern banking system creates currency far faster than trees can grow. Most people don't have a clue how currency is created. Economists and bankers make it sound so complex that people think they can't understand it. But I'm going to strip our monetary system down to its essence so that you can see the scam behind the curtain and just how it affects you. Every modern society creates currency in pretty much the same way. But since the US dollar is the majority of the world's currency, I'm going to use the United States as our example. It all starts when some politician says, vote for me and I'll make sure the government provides you more free stuff than my opponent will. But there's no such thing as a free lunch. So to provide that supposedly free stuff, the politicians vote for the country to spend more than its income. This is called deficit spending. To pay for that deficit spending, the Treasury borrows currency by issuing a bond. So what's a bond? If you think about it, a bond is really nothing but a glorified IOU. It's a pretty piece of paper with numbers printed on it that says, loan me $1 trillion today, and I promise over a 10-year period, I'm going to pay you back that $1 trillion plus interest. But what you need to understand is that Treasury bonds are our national debt. These glorified IOUs are to be paid back by you and I and our descendants through future taxation. Therefore, when the government issues a bond, it steals prosperity out of the future so that it can spend it today. The Treasury then holds a bond auction, and the world's largest banks show up and compete to buy part of our national debt and make a profit on it by earning interest. You'll notice that as we move through this process, the big banks are there, taking a cut every step of the way. This isn't by chance, as you'll see shortly. Then, through a shell game called open market operations, the banks get to sell some of those bonds to the Federal Reserve at a profit. To pay for the bonds, the Federal Reserve opens up its big old checkbook and writes bad, bogus, counterfeit checks that should bounce because they're drawn on an account that always has a zero balance. There isn't one penny in there. To quote from the Boston Federal Reserve, when you or I write a check, there must be sufficient funds in our account to cover that check. But when the Federal Reserve writes a check, there is no bank deposit on which that check is drawn. When the Federal Reserve writes a check, it is creating money. The Fed then hands those checks to the banks, and at this point, currency springs into existence. The banks then take that currency and buy more bonds at the next Treasury auction. But what is a check? A check is also an IOU. When you write a check, you're making a note that says, here's my IOU for cash. All you have to do is go to the bank and pick it up. Now, it's very, very important that you understand this process, because we're going to come back later and show you the devastating effect this has on you.
The Treasury issues IOUs, bonds. The banks then buy those IOUs with currency. The Federal Reserve then writes IOUs, checks, and hands them to the banks in exchange for the Treasury's IOUs, the bonds. And currency is created. So what's really happening is the Federal Reserve and the Treasury are just swapping IOUs, using the banks as middlemen, and abracadabra, presto, currency magically springs into existence. This process repeats and repeats over and over again, enriching the banks and indebting the public by raising the national debt. The end result is that there's a buildup of bonds at the Federal Reserve and currency at the Treasury. This process is also where all paper currency comes from. The Federal Reserve and the government mistakenly call it base money because they didn't watch episode 1 of this series and they don't know the difference between money and currency. But I will correctly refer to it as base currency because it is not money. It is currency, and as we've learned, there is a big difference. Money has to be a store of value and maintain its purchasing power over long periods of time. We learned in episode 1 that earlier in our history, our paper currency was just a claim check. It was a representation for real money of intrinsic value, the gold and silver that was held on deposit at the Treasury. You could walk into any bank and slap your currency, like say a $20 bill, on the counter and redeem it for real money, a $20 gold piece. But now, this base currency that's piling up back here is really nothing at the Treasury. You could walk into any bank and slap your currency, like say a $20 bill, on the counter and redeem it for real money, a $20 gold piece. But now, this base currency that's piling up back here is really nothing but a receipt or a claim check on an IOU, that bond. So it's really nothing but a supply of numbers. The Treasury then deposits the newly created currency into the various branches of the government, and the politicians say, hey, thanks for that. And the government does some deficit spending on public works, social programs, and war. The government employees, contractors, and soldiers then deposit their pay in the banks. Now, this may come as a shock to you, but when you deposit your currency with the bank, you're not actually depositing it into an account to be safely held in trust for you. Instead, you're actually loaning the bank your currency, and within certain legal limits, they can do with it pretty much anything they please. This includes gambling in the stock market and loaning it out, at a profit, of course. Now this is where the machine of currency creation really gets cranking, because this is where something called fractional reserve lending comes into play. Fractional reserve lending is exactly what it says. The banks are allowed to reserve only a fraction of your deposit and loan the rest out. Although reserve ratios may vary, I'm going to use a 10% reserve ratio as our example. If you deposit $100 in your account, the bank can legally take $90 of it and loan it out without telling you. The bank must hold $10 of your deposit in reserve just in case you want some of it. These reserves are called vault cash. But why does your bank account still say you have $100 if the bank has stolen $90 of it? Because the bank left IOUs it created called bank credit in its place. Now, I know this sounds crazy, but here it is in black and white from the Fed. Commercial banks create checkbook money when they grant a loan simply by adding new deposit dollars in accounts on their books in exchange for a borrower's IOU. These are nothing but numbers that the banks type into their computers. And even though these bank credit IOU numbers are very different from base currency numbers, because they only exist in computers, they are still currency. So now there is $190 in existence. Now, the reason people take out loans from the banks is to buy something. They're going to buy a house or a car or something like that. So the borrower takes the $90 that the bank loaned to him from your account, and he pays the seller of the item. But then the seller deposits that currency into his account, and his bank loans out 90% of that and leaves bank credit numbers in its place. So now there's $271 in existence. This process repeats and repeats until under a 10% reserve ratio, an initial deposit of just $100 can create up to $1,000 of bank credit, all backed by $100 of vault cash, just 10%. But as I said, reserve ratios vary wildly. On some deposits, it's 10%, on others, it's 3%, and on some forms of deposits, reserve requirements are 0. The result is that the expansion of the currency supply by the banks is far greater than even this example would lead you to believe. So once again, when currency is deposited in the banks get to lend it out, and then it gets redeposited and relent, redeposited and relent, redeposited and relent over and over again, creating bank credit all the way. This is where the vast majority of our currency supply comes from. In fact, 92 to 96% of all currency in existence is created not by the government, but here in the banking system. Now, massive amounts of currency spewing into society may at first sound like a fun idea. That is, until you remember one of the most important hidden secrets of money from episode 1, that the prices of everyday goods and services act as a sponge on an expanding currency supply. The more currency we have, the more prices rise. This is where inflation comes from. The true definition of inflation is an expansion of the currency supply. Rising prices are merely the symptom. So our entire currency supply is nothing but a couple of bucks whipped up in this hocus-pocus scam where the Treasury and the Federal Reserve swap glorified IOUs, and a bunch of numbers that the banks just type into their computers. That's it. That's our entire currency supply. It's nothing but a supply of numbers. Some of them printed, most of them typed, and there is nothing else. But if you thought that was crazy, get ready to enter the twilight zone of modern economics. We work for some of that currency supply. True wealth is your time, but we trade away moments of our lives, hour by hour, day by day, and year by year, for numbers that somebody printed on pieces of paper or just typed into a computer. Now those numbers represent our blood, sweat, tears, labor, ideas, and talent. We are what gives the currency its value. But here comes the really cruel joke. We work hard so that we can save some of that currency, so that we can pay the tax collector in the United States, it's known as the IRS. They then turn it over to the Treasury so that the Treasury can pay the principal plus interest on that bond that the Federal Reserve bought with a check drawn on an account that has nothing in it. Now let's do a recap on this section because this is where the system begins to rob you and I on a massive scale. Much of our taxes are not used for schools, roads, and public services, but to pay interest on bonds that the Federal Reserve bought with a check drawn on an account that has nothing in it. The Federal Reserve is committing fraud. But here's one of the biggest secrets of them all. Before the establishment of the Federal Reserve, there was no need for personal income tax. The Federal Reserve was created in 1913, and that very same year, the Constitution was amended to allow income tax. Do you really think this was just a coincidence? Ask yourself how much income tax you've paid over your lifetime. Much of it has been silently siphoned away into the hands of those who own the system. Yes, this system has owners. Who they are is an even bigger secret that we'll get to shortly. But first, we need to understand the mumbo-jumbo of the so-called debt ceiling. It's all based on a huge paradox. There was interest due on that bond, and there was interest due on every one of those. We need to understand the mumbo-jumbo of the so-called debt ceiling. It's all based on a huge paradox. There was interest due on that bond, and there was interest due on every one of those loans that the banks made. That means that there is interest due on every dollar in existence. Let me ask you something. If you borrow the very first dollar into existence, and that's the only dollar that exists on the planet, but you promise to pay it back plus another dollar's worth of interest, where do you get the second dollar to pay the interest? The answer is that you have to borrow that one into existence and promise to pay it back with interest as well. So now there are $2 in existence, but you owe $4, and so on and so on. The result is there's never enough currency to pay the debt. There is always more debt in the system than there is currency in existence to pay the debt. Therefore, the whole system is impossible. It is finite. It will come to an end one day. What would happen if the government stopped borrowing to do deficit spending? Are the payments on those treasury bonds going to stop? What would happen if the public stopped borrowing and going deeper into debt? Are your house and car payments going to stop? No. There is a payment due every month on the principal plus the interest on every dollar in existence, and those payments do not stop. If we stop borrowing, then no new currency is created to replace the currency that we used to make those payments. Whether you're making a payment on a loan or paying tax to make a payment on a bond, the portion of the payment that goes to pay off the principal extinguishes that portion of the debt. But the debt also extinguishes the currency. Currency and debt are like matter and antimatter. When they meet, they annihilate each other. If we just pay off the principal only on all the loans and bonds that exist, the entire currency supply just vanishes. So if we don't go deeper into debt every year, look what happens. The whole thing goes into a deflationary collapse under the weight of those payments. Politicians and pundits alike talk about balancing the budget, paying down the debt, and living within our means. They don't understand that that is deflationary. It is impossible to do under our current monetary system without collapsing the whole economy. This is why any talk of a debt ceiling is not only ridiculous, it's delusional. The system is designed to require ever-increasing levels of debt just to continue. And that's why politicians will always kick the can down the road and raise this so-called debt ceiling over and over again until the whole system finally collapses under its own weight. In other words, they don't want it to collapse on their watch. The founding fathers of the United States knew the dangers of central banking and fought to free themselves from this very thing. The Revolutionary War started out as a tax revolt, but now we must pay tax just to have a monetary system. Having just suffered through the hyperinflation of the continental dollar, which was printed into oblivion to finance the Revolutionary War, they understood the dangers of fiat currency and debt-based monetary systems. So to protect future generations from institutional theft and out-of-control government, they wrote into the Constitution that only gold and silver can be money for the simple fact that you can't print them. Our current system is not only unconstitutional, but it robs us of the liberty and prosperity our forefathers fought and died for. We are all feeling the effects of ignoring the Constitution right now. By forcing more currency into circulation, our purchasing power is diluted. Inflation is a slow and insidious stealth tax that is simply the result of this debt-based monetary system. This system empowers and benefits those who create the currency and receive it first, as they get to spend it into circulation before it has an effect on the economy. They're stealing purchasing power from you and transferring it to the banks and the government every hour of every day because of this false monetary system. And it's not like the people at the top don't know this. To quote the Federal Reserve, the decrease in purchasing power incurred by the holders of money due to inflation imparts gains to the issuers of money. This is a fraud. It is a pyramid scheme, it is a Ponzi scheme, it's a scam, and it's a lie. Our entire monetary system is nothing but a form of legalized theft. But here's the biggest con job of them all. The Federal Reserve is not federal. It has stockholders. There is no federal agency that has stockholders. What's a stockholder? A share of stock represents a percentage of ownership in a corporation. So the stockholders are the owners of that corporation. Therefore, the Federal Reserve is a private corporation with owners. And you can see it for yourself if you go to the Federal Reserve's website, and it will say, the stockholders receive an annual dividend of 6%. Now, we know that the stock in the Federal Reserve was originally issued to the largest banks in the United States. But because of mergers and acquisitions through the years, you can't actually trace who owns the stock in the Federal Reserve. That's a very closely guarded secret. My guess would be that the owners are those primary dealers, the banks that get to make a profit by selling part of our national debt, those bonds, to the Federal Reserve, who buys them with a check from nothing. Then we pay tax to pay the principal and the interest on those bonds so that the Federal Reserve can pay the banks a 6% dividend. Don't be alarmed if you don't quite comprehend the deception of this system.
Greetings, friends. Today we want to look at why the founding fathers of America, why they hated cash in quotation mark, and why they see it as oppressive, and how cash was viewed and seen, and how it was even invented, and how it is used today to take away our freedom. We want to look at how it was created, how it came about, how it was used to take away our freedom, and we are paying the cost dearly today. And so let's dive deep into the discussion, and let's look at it from a perspective that we might not have seen before, as we look into some historical data. Many of us think that cash is freedom, but oh no, it's not. It's just a mental perception, but it's not in this financial giant monopoly of the banking world, and how cash was invented, and the passing of the act by Nixon in the 1970s. So let's dive into it so that we can get a proper understanding, and this will help us also too in our perspective on the cashless system. So how was paper money invented, or currency as the expert would call it, not money? But paper bills were first used by the Chinese, who started carrying folded money during the Tang Dynasty. That's about in the 7th century AD. Mostly in the form of privately used bills of credit or exchange notes, and used it for more than 500 years before the practice began to catch on in Europe in the 17th century. So the Chinese were the first, according to history. But there's an interesting piece of this history of cash, even with the dynasty of Emperor Khan. And to take it from, to really summarize how cash was forced upon the people of China by the emperor. It was forced upon them. When the traders would come to Kang Dynasty, he would make a rule that the traders who come in from outside would have to trade only directly to him. Those who refuse to trade by cash were put to death. Those who would want to trade by gold, by silver, or any other means, it was forbidden. You would have to accept the paper money that the Kang Dynasty would offer. And so cash was forced or raped upon the society. And in the book of Marco Polo Travels, there is a chapter entitled How the Great Khan Causes the Bark of Trees Made into Something Like Paper to Pass for Money all over his country. That's a subtitle in one of the chapters of his book. And I'll be reading a few quotes from his book to give you a close perspective, an inside view of what was happening in the Khan Dynasty and what was happening. This is from Marco Polo, because he travels the world and he was working with the Chinese emperor closely. He was there witnessing all what was happening. He's the one who actually came back to Europe and brought the knowledge of paper money, because he has seen how the Khan Dynasty, how it operated and uses paper money. So quoting from his book, He says now that I have told you in detail of the splendor of this city of the emperors, I shall proceed to tell you of the mint which he has in the same city, in the which he has is money coined and struck, as I shall relate to you. And in doing so I shall make manifest to you how it is that the great Lord may well be able to accomplish even much more than I have told you, or I am going to tell you in this book. For tell it how I might, you never would be satisfied that I was keeping within truth and reason. The emperor's mint then is in this same city of Cumberland, and the way it is wrought is such that you might say he has the secret of an alchemy in perfection. And you would be right, for he makes his money after the fashion. He makes them take of the bark of certain tree, in fact of the mulberry tree, the leaves of which are the food of the silkworms. These trees being so numerous that the whole districts are full of them. What they take is a certain fine white bast or skin which lies between the wood of the tree and the thick outer bark, and this they make into something resembling sheets of paper, but black. When these sheets have been prepared, they are cut up into pieces on different sizes. He continues, and all these pieces of paper are issued with as much solemnity and authority as if they were of pure gold or silver, and on every piece a variety of officials whose duty it is have to write their names and to put their seals. And when all is prepared duly, the chief officer deputed by the Khan smears the seal entrusted to him with vermilion and impresses it on the paper, so that the form of the seal remains imprinted upon it in red. The money is then authentic. Anyone forging it would be punished with death, and the Khan causes every year to be made such a vast quantity of this money, which costs him nothing, but it must equal in amount all the treasure of the world. With these pieces of paper, made as I have described, he causes all payments on his own account to be made, and he makes them to pass current universally over all his kingdoms and provinces and territories, and whithersoever his power and sovereignty extends. And nobody, however important he may think himself, dares to refuse them on pain of death. And indeed everybody takes them readily. For wheresoever a person may go throughout the great Khan's dominions, he shall find these pieces of paper current, and shall be able to transact all sales and purchases of goods by means of them, just as well as if they were coins or pure gold. Furthermore, all merchants arriving from India or other countries, and bringing with them gold or silver or gems and pearls, are prohibited from selling to anyone but the emperor. He has 12 experts chosen for this business, men of shrewdness and experience in such affairs. These appraise the articles, and the emperor then pays a liberal price for them in those pieces of paper. The merchants accept his price readily, for in the first place they would not get so good and one from anybody else. And secondly, they are paid without any delay. And with this paper money, they can buy what they like anywhere over empire. While it is also vastly lighter to carry about on their journeys. So he buys such a quantity of those precious things every year that his treasure is endless. While all the time the money he pays away costs him nothing at all. Moreover, several times in the year, proclamation is made through the city that anyone who may have gold or silver or gems or pearls, by taking them to the mint, shall get an handsome price for them. And the owners are glad to do this, because they would find no other purchaser give so large a price. Thus the quantity they bring in is marvelous, though those who do not choose to do so may let it alone. Still, in this way, nearly all the valuables in the country come into the king's possession. When any of those pieces of paper are spoiled, not that they are so very flimsy neither, the owner carries them to the mint, and by paying 3% on the value, he gets new pieces in exchange. And if any baron or anyone else soever at need of gold or silver or gems or pearls in order to make plate or girdles or the like, he goes to the mint and buy as much as he lists, paying in this paper money. Now that you have heard the ways and means whereby the great Khan may have, and in fact has, more treasure than all the kings in the world, and you know all about it and the reason why. End of quote. So this is Marco Polo's account of this unique Chinese method of the minting of money through the use of paper. It's both amusing and tragic, and yes, it shows how many were even put to death who refuses to purchase or to exchange by this means. And so this was under the Kang's dynasty in the 13th century. He has perfected the art and make it widespread. And now this was Marco Polo's account of it now, bringing it and introducing the concept now to Europe. But let's take a trip now to North America. Let's take a trip now to North America, to the founding fathers of America, and listen to their point. Let's hear what George Washington wrote to Thomas Jefferson on August 1, 1786. George Washington, the first president of America. He says, paper money has had the effect in your state that it will ever have, to ruin commerce, oppress the honest, and open the door to every species of fraud and injustice. This is George Washington. Let's hear what Thomas Jefferson had to say about paper money. Paper is poverty. It is only the ghost of money and not money itself. Paper money is unjust, declared now James Madison, chief architect of the Constitution of America. It is unconstitutional, for it affects the rights of property as much as taking away equal value in land. So these were the founding fathers. One says it's oppress the honest, open the door to every species of fraud and injustice. Another says it is not real money. Another says that it is unconstitutional. Why was the founding fathers seem so against paper money? That's the question. Before we even look at why they were saying these things, even there's a quote from J.P. Morgan in 1912 before Congress, where he says, "Gold is money, everything else is credit." Morgan was testifying in an hearing before Congress in 1912. But why would the founding fathers, if we should come back to that question, seize paper money as unjust? Are you using the unjust money today? Are you using the money that the founding father says is oppressing the honest today? Are we still using that same money today? Are we caught in a web that we cannot come out of? Is there an escape route? Is it a sin for the people of God to use paper money as it's been styled as unjust, oppressing the honest, opening the door to every species of fraud and injustice? Oh no. Oh no, it doesn't make us sin or unjust to use paper money, even though it's described in that way. Not at all. But let's see why they look at it even in this way. So let's go to the year 1775 to 1783, those years. And for those who are familiar with history will know that is the time of the American Revolution or the War on Independence. Remember, America was a colony of the British Empire. And one of the reasons why this war started, one of the reasons, some will list 4 major reasons. You will read some articles that will list up to about 7, a whole lot of factors. But one of the factors that are included was Benjamin Franklin. He went to England, and when he saw in England poverty and all sorts of unpleasant sight all around, even those who were working were still in poverty, the working class. And he realizes that it traces back to the paper dollar, the paper money. What was happening? Benjamin Franklin realized. What was happening is that the private banks in England were printing money for the government and loaning it to the government at a price. So for example, they would print $100 and they would give it to the UK government or monarch. And they in turn would have to pay back, let's say, $120. So the people had to pay an income tax. In order to pay back the interest that the private banks were charging. And so the nation was left in poverty. And that's what Benjamin Franklin saw. The founding fathers of America, the United States, they knew what was happening in the British Empire. And the British Empire realizes that, A, we cannot really keep up with this loan. We will have to extend this tax to our colonies. And they wanted to impose this tax on America. And the founding fathers say, no, this will only lead us to poverty. like what is happening in England. And they resisted it. Because that's what caused the major war. Because the colonies they were printing and using their own money. And so in America, in the mid 1700s and so on going back, there were no income taxes. No tax on their paper currency or money that they were using. No tax to the people. They printed their own. They were using their own. Gold was still being used and silver and paper money, but they never charged the people an income tax because they didn't have a private bank above the government that was charging a tax to use or to print or to circulate a paper currency or money as we call it today, but it's not real money. So that's one of the main reasons why the Civil War. So when Benjamin Franklin traveled to London, he noticed the population was in a state of unrest and beggars and tramps quite prevalent. In addition, poverty was at a high level among the working class, while the wealthier group was being inundated with taxes. It was getting hard to sustain the entire economy. As a result, interest was being charged on all of these loans, which were secured with promissory notes as collateral from the government. So the bank loaned the government money, and the government had to pay interest. The bank was content to collect interest on these notes, causing the English people to have an income tax imposed upon them. It was also necessary to have these income tax levied. They were thinking on the colonists, which was met with stiff resistance, which led to the American Revolution. However, what kind of push the English monarch and the government to want to push this tax on the colonies? The Bank of England found its profits dropping and demanded the colonies stop using their scrip because they were using their own money that they call scrip and void this type of currencies. And it causes a big problem because in 1764, Parliament passed a law, the Currency Act, ruling that the colonists had to use only British money, not their own money. This was to force the Americans to borrow their money from the Bank of England and pay interest, which they were not used to. Hence you see why the founding fathers spoke out against cash. They realized that it enslaves, it oppresses, and it brings nations to their knees and at the control of private bankers. And that's what they were fighting against. That's what they opposed. And that's what the danger that they saw in paper money. And that's why they spoke out against it, because they realized it has no value. Like the Khan dynasty, they took what is of value from you and give you what is no value in exchange. That's the same game of life that Satan is playing today. He takes away your gold of faith. He takes away your silver of pureness, your gold of pure faith, and he takes it and gives you for something that has no value. And it's the same thing he's doing today. And that's why we see that even after the sinking of the Titanic, the battle that the founding fathers were fighting to prevent the privatization of money, we realize that that's what happened after the Federal Reserve, through the control of the papacy, the Jesuits, got control of money. The US dollar, and that's why the US dollar today, it's called what? Let's listen a clip from Pastor Bill Hughes, historian and pastor Bill Hughes.
Revelation 18:24 says that death goes back to Rome. Did people die on the Titanic?
A lot.
A lot of people
yes,
died.
Yes.
So you say, well, was it a freakish accident or was it a plot?
Yeah.
Well, Kirk, if you go back and you analyze in the early 1900s, there was a great push to again establish a central bank in the United States.
Yes.
The reason why? Two reasons. Number one, so that the Jesuit order would have unlimited amount of money to finance war. World War I was on the horizon. It had already been planned. World War II had already been planned. And many other wars they knew would have to be fought.
So they needed money to finance it.
They needed money. Another reason, Kirk, for a central bank was in establishing a central bank, you could bankrupt the wealthiest country in the world, and
Okay.
that's the United States.
Okay.
So Jacob Schiff, a Rothschild...
Yeah, so that's what I was gonna, how does this tie now to the sinking of the Titanic?
I'll get to it.
Yes.
You have Jacob Schiff, a wealthy Rothschild Jesuit agent in America, pushing for a central bank. The Rockefellers are pushing, the Morgans are pushing, but there's people who are opposing it.
Okay.
John Jacob Astor, the richest man in the world, except for the Pope, he opposed the central bank.
Okay.
Benjamin Guggenheim, Isidor Straus, the famous Emporium, Sears and Emporium man.
Okay.
These men were very, very wealthy.
Yes.
They all opposed a central bank.
Okay.
And there were other very, very wealthy men who said, we will never go along with a central bank. We will fight it hook, line, and sinker. We will put all of our energies against
Okay.
the establishment of that bank.
So don't tell me now these guys were tied to the Titanic here.
All of those men, Kirk, died on the Titanic.
Okay.
So what you have was J.P. Morgan, who owned the fleet of ships called the White Star Line. This is all in my book, Secret Terrorist. He owned the White Star Line. J.P. Morgan was a Rothschild Jesuit agent.
Uh-huh.
Morgan was commissioned to build the Titanic,
Okay.
which was a part of his fleet of ships, the White Star Line. And on that ship were to be put all the wealthy people of the world
Okay.
who would oppose a central bank in the United States.
Okay.
They were all put on the Titanic. They all were on, Kirk. They start off across the Atlantic Ocean, and Edward Smith, who was the captain of the Titanic, he had sailed the North Atlantic Ocean for 26 years. He knew it like the back of his hand. He was told, sink it.
But you might say, oh, if the Jesuit control money and has control of unlimited money, as Revelation 18 makes it known, the whole chapter, that they are the one who control gold, silver, the food, everything, industries that you can think about, precious metal, everything, pharmaceutical, Revelation 18 verse 23, sorcery, they control all the industries. But you might be scratching your head and saying, but every country, for the most part, have their own currency. When the Jesuit took control of the printing and distribution of money, the Federal Reserve, notice the name that it's called, federal. Federal means a government. But the Federal Reserve is privately owned. And I think it's something that many of us, it goes over our head, including myself at one time, thinking that it was the US who had owned money. And until in the late part of the early to late part of the 2000, I realized is that it's not the US government that owns the US currency, but it is owned by private individual stockholders. But if you notice how they control the whole world with this money, another nickname for the US dollar, it's called the petrodollar. Why it's called the petrodollar? Because it is the money, it is the only money, paper money, that is used to trade or to purchase oil. For the most part internationally, the US currency is the money that is used to purchase oil. And that's why it's called the petrodollar. And each bank all over the world has to have the US currency in reserve. So when the Jesuits took control of the Federal Reserve, they had took control of the world's money and economy. Because every other currency all over the world is backed by the US dollar. And that's how they gain control. But now, how does it oppresses and enslave us and the future generation? As it says in Proverbs 22 verse 7, the rich ruleth over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender. And so through the US currency, the Jesuits have gained control over every nation. The Jesuits have extended their power over every government over this world. And that's why almost every country in this world is in debt. And through the debt ceiling, that's what they use to enslave nations and to get them to bow. There's more to this. It is what is being used to control the whole world. Because every country, they has to pay an interest on every dollar that is being used or being circulated. The people have to pay it back. And this is what God was warning the children of Israel about. Make God our sovereign ruler. But the people says they wanted a king. And that's why we're being oppressed today. Tax on every side we turn. Every side we turn. And so it is that God foresee these things and is warning his people